everybody. Welcome to Forensic Friday. I am Shannon, your host. And of course, I have my two amazing co-hosts, Harlot, who is a forensic scientist as well as a professor, and Bertha, who is a forensic anthropologist as well as a current CSI. And our amazing guest, and you guys, I'm so excited about this. You have no idea, is Wendy Crane, and she is a medical-legal death investigator. Now, if you have not heard of that, you're not the only one on this podcast. I hadn't heard of it until recently either. So I'm going to have a million questions, just like all of you. So everybody, welcome to Forensic Friday.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
So Wendy, tell
Crane.
us. Yes.
Like you said, I'm a medical legal death investigator. I have been such for Broward County, Florida, which is the main city that some of you might know is Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We're just north of Miami. I have been doing this for just over 16 years. I have a background. I went to the University of Central Florida. I started in forensic science, but it was their particular program, not criticizing at all, but just it was more lab-based, and I'm just not quite that smart. So I sort of gravitated more towards anthropology and forensic anthropology, and was more fascinated by bones and by the process of decomposition and the changes that happen to the body in death and that sort of thing. And so I gravitated towards that, and that was more my focus of my undergrad. So when I graduated, for several years I had worked as a chef. People tend to find that ironic for some reason. I don't know.
Going right from decomposition to chef.
Yeah.
That's great.
But, miss it every day. I loved that job, but I graduated and I put out a bunch of different, job applications. And forensics is very much a niche. And I think Bertha will probably back me up in this, but and it's a government job. So you basically are waiting for somebody to die, retire, get fired, something. There's very limited jobs. And obviously, with government budgets and everything, that limits the availability of jobs. So I just basically put out a cluster of applications for a crime scene investigator, lab technicians, whatever forensic science discipline. And the Broward Medical Examiner was the first to call.
Can you tell us what a medical legal death investigator is?
Okay. My job primarily is I work in Florida. We have the medical examiner system. There are two systems in this country. There's the coroner system and the medical examiner system. In Florida, we're a medical examiner system, which means the chief medical examiner is a physician, is a forensic pathologist. In the coroner system, that's not required. And the medical examiner system, the chief medical examiner is appointed by the governor of the state. Coroner system is an elected position, which we can discuss later on if you'd like. So we are a medical examiner system. My primary job is to take the initial notification from, most of the time, it's either police or nurses from the hospital.
And when you say notification, you're talking about the death notification?
Yes.
Okay.
They're advising that somebody passed away.
Okay.
I do want to say that, because I didn't know this before I did this job, we're not notified of every death.
Okay.
We are only notified of deaths that, for example, somebody that passes away in a hospital of a natural disease, cancer, AIDS, the heart disease, anything like that, they don't call us. That doesn't have anything to do with us. That's handled, and those death certificates are handled they're signed by private physicians.
Okay.
We are notified when there is a question of trauma. The person was in a car accident, they were injured somehow, or drug overdose, a perfectly healthy person that just seemed to just pass away for no particular reason, or any kind of criminal abortion. And again, somebody questioned me on that as far as criminal abortion. That means criminal abortion is an abortion that's performed by someone that is not licensed to practice that. That's,
God.
so I don't mean to get political, and I know that's a big hot subject right now, but it's just
Right.
that, are not licensed to do that. That's what that is.
Okay.
Or any sort of like a public threat. And I'm not talking about COVID, but for example, like if somebody came into our country and had mad cow disease or Ebola, which we haven't heard from in a while, or now it's monkeypox,
I was
which,
going to say.
Right.
yeah, anything like that that's a public threat. Those are the things that are we're notified of. The police, for the most part, if somebody passes away at home, the police are called and then they'll report the death. We don't take everybody into the medical examiner, because if someone passes away in their home and there's no suspicion of foul play, there's no trauma reported by the police, and there's no suspicion of, for example, a drug overdose,
Mhm.
and they have a primary care physician and they have medical problems, known diagnoses, then they go straight to the funeral home and their private physician signs their death certificate, which is based on their medical history.
Okay.
Is it exactly accurate? Not necessarily, but it's based on what presumably most likely led to their passing. If they had hypertension or diabetes or something, then the private physician would list that on the death certificate as the most likely cause of why this person's not here, if in absence of anything else that would make it our case. So I had seen a dead body before, but a couple of dead bodies, but never anything that was particularly, not much of anything. I saw somebody under a tarp and a leg hanging out and that sort of thing, but really nothing. And I remember walking in my first day, and the human resources guy at the time, walked me back into the morgue, and he went to the cooler where the bodies are held and opened the door. And I remember feeling like I thought I was going to faint. And I just was not sure. It wasn't really fear.
Wendy, of all people.
It was fear. I don't know. I can't even really dictate exactly what it was, but I remember thinking, what have I gotten myself into?
That was going to be what I was just about to ask you. So when you got the call for the job, were you aware of the full extent of what it was?
No clue. Not a clue. Not
Wow.
a clue. And probably the dead bodies and the trauma of, that people have suffered is probably not even the hardest part of what we do. It's dealing with the bereaved. It's dealing with the families of people that have lost someone in whatever way they lost them. We deal with all different types of, unfortunate deaths. We deal with, sometimes natural, sometimes we have people that seem perfectly healthy and don't have a doctor or any diagnosis or anything. And they just seem to they just kind of die in bed for some reason. And they're in their 40s or 30s or something. And then when we do the autopsy, we find out they're full of lymphoma. This happened the other day. The 31-year-old perfectly healthy looking young man had been feeling his stomach had been bothering him. He just felt kind of tired or whatever. He went to the ER and he passed away. We do the autopsy and he's absolutely full of cancer. No clue, had no idea.
Oh my goodness.
So there's things like that but then talking to his mother, and there's so many questions, and the question we can never, ever seem to answer is why in any investigation of death, no matter what it is, if it's homicide, if it's suicide, accidents, natural, why is this person not here anymore? We never have that answer, unfortunately, and that's rough.
Yeah.
Because that's what families always want, but I certainly was not, of all the other things that I've dealt with and had to kind of tread through and learning, it's always a learning process with death investigation, because every time that you think that you've seen it all, the universe will show you that you haven't. And there'll be another learning, another situation where you're learning more about something, either about family dynamics or about the cause of death or about, just how people live their lives. and I'm not sure, I would think Bertha could speak to this maybe a little bit, but as a death investigator, just as a human being, I'm a very nosy person. I like to see how you're living your life. I want to see how you were doing before whatever unfortunate thing occurred. If it happened in the house, obviously, if it's somebody that unfortunately suffered, in a car accident or something like that, or something that didn't occur in their home, we're not going to be able to reconstruct their life.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I was never prepared for dealing with grief, and I was not trained for that. I had to learn that on the fly, and I had to seek out my own teaching of how to deal with people that, have lost someone, and how to deliver news and how to handle certain kinds of sensitive information.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times it's said in the teachings, shall we say, or whatever, just tell them what happened, be perfectly honest, don't drag your feet and don't mess around and just kind of, something happened and then, they had an accident, and that, just say it. And certain things like that, it's taken a long time, and it's always a learning process, always, so, and that's part of what attracts me to the field of death investigation is I'm never going to master this craft, no matter what. There's always going to be something I don't know or something I've never learned. And, but the feeling of being able to serve the families that have lost someone. And if somebody just tells me, you made the worst day of my life a little bit easier, that's the best day of work I can have.
Oh,
It's sad in a way, but it means a lot.
yeah, I could imagine why that means so much to you.
It does.
In what,
it does.
Yeah.
It means I did my job correctly for them.
Can a family request it to go to the medical examiner?
In certain cases, if they suspect, for example, foul play that we were not and the police were not aware of at the time when the investigation was being conducted at the house or wherever they ended up passing away, work, wherever they were, they can file a report with the police agency that was involved.
Okay.
And then it will be up to the police to request us to be involved. If they think, okay, this might have some traction, there might be something to this, then they will ask us. But families, we do not take direct family requests without some sort of a police investigation.
Okay.
Or sometimes fire rescue will raise issues where police are not involved, but fire rescue is. Occasionally we'll deal with that too. But typically direct family requests, no. But we also will let them know that they're allowed to hire like a private pathologist to do a private autopsy. And in some cases, those private pathologists will, find something that is an issue and raise it to us, and then it will become a medical examiner case.
Okay.
So Wendy, how much will it cost a private autopsy? Do you have
Private autopsy?
idea?
As I understand it, it depends on how much work you want done on your loved one. For example, there's anything from a private pathologist will do like a record review, or they'll do only toxicology tests, or they'll do a full autopsy. But as I understand it, the last I have been informed, it's anywhere from about $1,500 to approximately $5,000. Sometimes that is covered by insurance, sometimes. But yeah, it's anywhere typically from $1,500 to $5,000.
And Wendy, have you guys ever had a case like that where a private pathologist would take on, and performing, let's say, a full autopsy, and then there's some findings that,
Oh yeah,
you have?
We have. It's rare.
It's rare. Okay.
Happen. for example, one of the private pathologists called us and said, okay, well, this person's positive for all kinds of drugs that are at lethal amounts. And obviously that now has to be certified by a medical examiner. That can't be certified by a private doctor or a private pathologist. Right. So it doesn't occur that much, but it has happened. And also sometimes families don't, trust our results, or they think that there's some suspicion of impropriety, and they are completely within their rights to hire a private pathologist to go behind our medical examiner and do a private autopsy after we have done so as well.
You said a lot of things actually that just really hit home. The first one is, who was this person and how did this person live? And I don't think you said nosy, yeah, but at the same time, it's more than nosy. I think it's trying to get a sense of the mental health of the person.
That's sure.
Right. And I have found myself in that same situation because these people are not inviting us to their home. So we're going in as is, whatever
by
they
force
did
in a way, without true force. But yeah, I mean,
right.
It's not
Exactly.
voluntary. We're not being invited in. Yeah.
We're not being invited in, it's not like, let's clean the house before we have guests, some
You're
sort of
seeing it as
cleanup.
is.
You're
Correct.
seeing it as is. And that really leads to a better understanding of, the mental state of the person. I've always thought about that. And a lot of our audiences are not going to understand, that part. And I think it's important that we bring it to their attention. And it's also, we see that mental state of the person, but it's also ours because you said it many times during, your intro. It's heartbreaking. Nobody teaches you how to deal with, a mother, a father, a family member coming to you and maybe just breaking down in your arms. What do you do to keep that mental sanity? So how do you cope with all of that?
And even, on the tail end of your statement there, we've even had moments where there's a moment of laughter and not at the expense of the person ever, of course. It's about something they did or something that's ironic or what have you. And the bereaved will always, most of the time will stop and say, oh God, they wouldn't want me to laugh. And I say, yes, they would.
Yeah, they would.
Yes, they would. Allow yourself that. So as far as how I deal with it, I don't always deal with it well, but I am very conscious of that, and I have to remain very vigilant when it comes to my mental health. And I think it's something that we all need to talk about. You know what? It's okay. It's okay to break down.
Yeah.
There's times to family members and, my voice cracks or I kind of have some tears or what have you. And I think that's okay. But in my personal life, I try and do things that I consider healthy. I really love to travel. I love to get away from here, get away from this geography. There's nothing, I don't hate anything about where I live. I love it here, but get away and separate, like get off the phone. All my loved ones know exactly where I am if they need to reach me, but I'm not available and I'm going to be somewhere else. I do have someone that I speak to when I need to, a therapist.
Excellent.
I'm not ashamed of that.
That's what I'm going to ask you.
That seems like a weakness, and she's not affiliated with my job. She's somebody that I seeked out on my own. She's one of my weapons, is what I consider it. I love yoga. I do yoga anytime I can, even when I'm home. I try and go to class, but when not, I do some, meditation, some breathing exercises, things that help me kind of erase my mind so that I can sleep.
Okay.
Sometimes I come home and I watch cartoons or I watch something completely mindless, like Harry Potter or Pixar movies or something like that. That's completely a no-brainer, shall we say. or I play Fortnite with my nephew. I have a 9-year-old nephew who I'm crazy about. And, you know, it's something that completely detaches me from what my reality can be, 9 to 5 or 7 to 5 or what have you. And part of what we survive with, I think, with any difficult job, anything where you see trauma and you see difficult things, is having a sense of humor. Be respectful about it. You never make fun of anybody that's suffered anything, that's deceased, nothing like that. But just sometimes being able to have those moments of lightheartedness about whatever sometimes can really just help, you know.
I've worked with you in several cases, and, you know, I kind of know you on a personal level as well, is the humility. You know, you provide that. And I think that there's a lack there of that specific trait in the field. And
our
you
own
bring
people
it
as well. Our own
yeah.
people in my investigations department as well. I mean, it's not, I'm not pointing it at police or fire or anybody. Us too. We're guilty of that as well, you know, but I'd love if we just ever be able to get over that somehow.
Right? You know, leave that
It's
ego
okay to
aside.
say you don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know everything. Okay.
Going back to what you were saying, you know, do you ever master something, and do you want to master it? Because then it means that you stop
Then I'll
learning,
be bored.
right?
No.
Yeah.
No, then I'll be bored. I'll be like, okay, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
your day is
there's so
never the
many-
same. Neither
Huh?
one of you in what you do, Bertha or Wendy, is the same. So it's just constantly learning.
it's always just coming at you. Like, it's like, well, what fresh hell is this now? You know, like, really? You know, you don't ever know what your day's going to be like, you know? And sometimes a second set of eyes with CSIs or the detectives or something will see something I don't see, or I'll see something you don't see, or whatever. But it works the best when we all work together and we just come together as a team and go, okay, we're going to figure this out. And
Oh, hell yeah.
there's
Oof.
no, you know what I mean? Like, we all bring something to the table.
What is I don't know if it's going to be the weirdest or the most difficult evidence or lack of evidence that you've had to deal with? In other words, did you have something and it just, don't get this, can't figure this out? Or did you have something and it was so complete? Like, what has been the most difficult flip to solve? Did that make any sense?
Yeah, it did.
One of those ones that you just stick in your back pocket as a lesson learned that you're going to have to pull from sometime.
Okay, I can think of one. So this was a very seemingly routine call from a police officer on a scene at a home. Okay. And it was a deputy. So it was a road patrol officer. He was by himself. He was the only one and so he says, okay, this guy's, you know, he's a little bit decomposed, but he's not to the point that I can't identify him. I can like look at his driver's license and I can say that's him, you know, and he was in a secure residence, his home, whatever. So, and he's got diabetes. He's got all these other medical problems. I haven't heard back from his doctor yet, and so I said, okay. And he happened to mention, he said, well, he's got a towel on his head looks like it has blood on it. And I'm like red blood? Like, because just for context, decomposition fluid has a different color. It's not really red. I'm sure you probably know that from what you do. So he said, no, this is bright red. And it's like, it looks like a washcloth over his head. And I'm like, okay, it's covering his face and everything. So how did you identify him? Well, I mean, you know, I looked at, I'm like, okay, but you didn't look at his face. No. Okay. But this thing has red blood on one side of it. Yeah. And I'm like, something just didn't feel right. So I said, you know what? Hang out, don't touch him, don't move him, don't do anything. I'm going to come out. So I go, and the washcloth is now next to him with blood on it. And I was like, okay, didn't you say it was on his head? Well, yeah, but I wanted to look at him, and he's got like a zit on his head. And I'm like, a zit, huh? Okay. So it was a bullet wound. So I thought, okay, well, maybe this has been altered. Maybe there's a gun under him or something. I thought maybe this is a suicide. I don't know, because he's sitting in it's like one of those sofas that, like a wraparound kind of deal.
Okay.
And so he's sitting on the end of that. And I'm like, okay, well, let me move him and see. Well, as soon as I move him, clang, 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 bullet casings.
Oh,
More than one. Ooh, this is probably not self-inflicted. So I put him down, and then I called the homicide unit and said, yeah, we might have a little problem here. So turns out ended up being a homicide. So
Went from somebody sick with diabetes waiting to hear the doctor to a multiple gunshot wound.
he was about to go straight to the funeral home, and I never would have seen him. But
right.
sometimes, and again, could I have missed some cases along the way? Sure. There's probably people that went and got buried or cremated or whatever, and we never know. We're going to miss things. But this was one of those cases where I was just like, what? Because he seemed like such a, also, when you say somebody's like a victim, like not a high risk victim, somebody that's not necessarily that we know of in a criminal lifestyle or in sex trafficking or in something like that, that makes them more of a high risk victim. This gentleman was just kind of an older fella, and it turns out he had some dispute with a neighbor, and that didn't go well. But from everything we could tell otherwise, before we really delved into things, it just seemed like just a natural death, just a guy, and he was just sitting up in his chair or on the sofa, and we didn't think there was anything wrong with it. So
there were no signs of like an altercation in the house.
No, he was just, no. I think he was either napping or something, or the guy just came up to him and shot him.
Right.
When he was just sitting there like watching TV or something, because the TV was still on.
Oh my
And
God.
it was like a 22, so it was very small holes,
Yeah.
Just,
I like the zit
ones
comment,
that it
though.
just completely twisted what we thought we were presented with. It was just nothing.
Right.
And it wasn't nothing. So that's one of the things.
So on a case like that, where let's say you weren't called in and off he goes, I would hope that as soon as they heard those clang, clang, clangs, everything would have stopped. But had it not, and the body ends up at the funeral home with the funeral director and everybody that's working on the body realize we need to stop. There's something
They
going
have
on
before.
here. Okay.
Yes, they have before. They've, for example, I had one that it was called in that the gentleman, he was deceased in bed, what have you, seemed okay. He's got heart disease. He's got all kinds of, okay, all right, good. The next day, and as I'm sure you're aware, sometimes bruising and that sort of thing can progress and be more pronounced the following day, even when somebody's deceased. So the embalmer actually called us in the middle of the night, and he was like, I was just doing this case and I was getting ready to, and this guy's got a ligature mark around his neck. And so we called the police department that had initially handled it. And turns out the wife didn't want anybody to know that he ended his own life, but he'd hung himself with the ceiling fan. But she had taken him down and put him in the bed because she didn't want the stigma of suicide. But she came clean and she said, I'm sorry. And, and we're like, look, we're not charging with a crime or anything. It's just, but we figured it out. But they will, oftentimes the funeral homes are taking a really good look at those bodies, and they will notify us when they see things like that.
Bertha being our crime scene investigator and you being the medical legal death investigator, and you're talking about going in homes, you're talking about looking at the scene, you're talking about dealing with families, there's so much crossover to what the two of you do. What is the difference?
It's actually pretty easy to explain that, actually.
Okay.
Bertha is the CSI, and whatever detective or detectives or police detectives are accompanying her are there to establish whether a crime has been committed. The medical examiner is there to determine why this individual is no longer on this earth. We are there, we're the medical investigators, we're there to determine why this person passed away. It doesn't matter what crime, that's, you know, criminal activity and everything is to be determined by the police. Would you agree with that, Bertha, or did I
100%.
too
So
much,
one
or-
is that, no, it's perfect. Because one is the legal and the other one would be, although, you know,
There are areas where that would cross over.
where there's,
Oh,
right.
sure. Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
And what do you do there? I mean, what is the role
Sure.
there?
And like I said, you know, my role is to gather evidence and information to assist the forensic pathologist, who's the doctor who's going to conduct the autopsy, on what preliminary information I've been able to gather about what possibly may have led to the person's demise. Obviously, we get surprises sometimes, so, you know, we're not always accurate. But so when I respond to usually the detective or an officer will call the medical examiner and speak to me or one of my coworkers, then I'll just say, okay, if this is something that I typically will respond to, okay, I'll see you guys in a few minutes. Don't touch the body, don't move anything, you know, we'll do this together. So I respond, and then I'm usually given a briefing of the information that's known so far from witnesses, bystanders, family members, what have you. They'll brief me on that, and I take that always with a grain of salt because, again, the police are there to establish whether or not a crime's been committed. I'm here to say why this gentleman's not or woman's not here anymore. So I, you know, as I enter the scene, typically with a detective or crime scene investigator or both, try not to be colored with the preliminary information because you just never know. And sometimes, like I said, we're looking for, you know, I want to go look at the medication that they're on, if they're on anything, or how they've been feeling recently. Had they complained of fatigue, fevers, headache, anything, you know, that was out of the ordinary. What's their job? Sometimes people are exposed to toxins and, you know, or somebody's a painter and you need to know, you know, what their kind of things are being exposed to.
Okay.
And then also, you know, as I'm entering the scene, I look for example, environmental factors. Is there a raw wiring anywhere around the person, or were they on a ladder, or they're at the bottom of a ladder, or, you know, anything like that. Try not to have tunnel vision. Of course, we're always all guilty of that sometimes, where something seems like, oh, the simplest, you know, explanation is probably going to be, well, it's not always right. You know, and oftentimes, for example, you know, Broward County is, as most of Florida is, just terribly bogged down with drug-related deaths. So, you know, for example, you see what looks like drug paraphernalia, maybe a pipe or a syringe or something like that. Well, also you see a syringe, well, was the person maybe diabetic too? You can't rule, you know, we need to find that out too, you know, because a lot of times there's a perfectly reasonable, you know, explanation for why they, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a drug history unless that's already been established. So I try and just keep an open mind as I enter the scene and take photos and then gather information on their medical and social history. Do they smoke? Do they drink alcohol? Do they have a drug history? If so, what is it? You know, are they, you know, more opiates? Is it, you know, heroin? Is it IV drug use? You know, and just try and build a picture of what this could possibly be. And because Broward County has such a proximity to a major drug port, we find ourselves in the unfortunate position of getting all the new drugs. And how that affects the medical examiner, unfortunately, is oftentimes we start to see things that look like it's a drug overdose because of paraphernalia and situational and people saying, oh yeah, we were doing something, but we can't see anything in the toxicology results, which means we have a new drug that we don't know how to test for. And that's happened a couple times during my career already, and I just assume it's probably going to continue to happen sometimes. So, but yeah, we are in charge of gathering as much information, photographs, information from the scene or the hospital or any witnesses to assist the forensic pathologist that's going to conduct the autopsy in determining what the cause of death will likely be. And oftentimes, once they've done an autopsy, then there will be further follow-up that's required. They'll ask us, does this person ever have medical, issues? Have they been in a car accident? Why do they have a big plate in their leg? Or, things like that. So that arise from the findings of the autopsy. So does that answer your question, Carla?
Yes, sure. So when you have those cases, for example, where the toxicology report becomes negative, and you still suspect that maybe it's a new drug that the person might have consumed, in those cases, do you actually storage those samples to be reanalyzed later on in case that the new drug actually is identified?
We actually, our chief toxicologist is brilliant, truly. And in a case like that where they believe that it might be drug related, but we're coming up with negative toxicology results, he will ask if, for example, the police department found like a sample of something, like they found some sort of powder or something on scene, or residue in a pipe or a syringe or something, he'll request that they bring that in. And then he will try and test that to see if he can figure out, what the signature is of that, But can anybody please talk about the opiate crisis in this country?
Oh, yeah.
It's
Oh my God.
destroying our youth. It's gotten so bad that it's actually altered the life expectancy in this country for young people. It's gotten shorter because of the opiate crisis. I've seen the human side of this, and I talk to women almost on a daily basis about their children who are just in their 20s, who are no longer here because of the availability of this stuff. And, there's been families over the course of my career, and there's one that sticks out, and the deceased, his name was Greg, and I always remember that because that's my father's name. And his mother has maintained a relationship with me to some degree, at least just, kind of how you doing, and, I'm thinking about you and that sort of thing. And thank you for what you do and all of that. And she, she posts pictures of him on Facebook and, his birthday and the unfortunate, anniversary of when he passed and everything. And he's got this just gorgeous, like megawatt smile. And everything she tells me about him is just humanized what a good guy he was. And addiction doesn't care what kind of a person you are. It doesn't. And it affects all of us. The thing is, this opiate crisis is just horrifying, and it's taking numbers like nothing compared to gun violence. If you really compare, I speak to several families every day, every week about a loved one that has died of this, complications of an opiate disorder or opiate overdose or what have you. And unfortunately, Florida, a few years ago, we had, a prescription drug problem where we had, clinics that were, making it pretty
easy
available to get prescription drugs.
Yeah.
And then thankfully, the Florida legislation canceled that, but then we have all these opiate addicts with no outlet. So guess what happens? Heroin happens. And then after that, a cheaper alternative for fentanyl becomes available. And it's easy, and you can get it online. You can get it from, you can get it sent to your, if you have the guts, you can get it sent to your mailbox.
It's amazing how accessible this is. And I think it was yesterday morning.
Only this, it takes this much to kill you.
It does. It does. It was on the news. It stated that, I can't remember the actual numbers, but it was a great number in the thousands that were confiscated. Now, the question is, what about the drugs that have not been confiscated and that have been distributed, throughout the United States? And that's very alarming. But there is a very serious epidemic. It's probably because it's not put on your face, or it hasn't been as dramatically placed.
It's not as violent either. It's
correct. It's not as violent.
If your home isn't affected by it, it's very easy to not even realize it's going on, because it's not going to be on the news every time a child or a young person overdoses or is taking a drug.
And we're not talking about those numbers.
Something, you're not seeing that. So unless it's affecting you at home, you're not really paying attention to it in your daily basis. But when a massive tragedy happens and it's all over the news, that's when it becomes a big deal to everybody. And it's only because what's happening with the opioids is not in your face every single day, every single death. It's the only reason why it's not, people don't realize it's as big as it is.
And the lacing also, the lacing, before it was lacing, cocaine is being laced, but now marijuana is also being laced.
Everything.
So these kids that, are just saying, oh, well, I'm just going to buy some weed here and there and, smoke it. And they have no idea that the marijuana or the cannabis that's being purchased has been laced with fentanyl. That's another huge thing.
Yeah,
it is a huge problem.
Well, someone's addiction to already cocaine, heroin, anything like that, it's rough enough. But then adding something that is lethal in the smallest doses to that, it's ending people. Because a lot of times I don't think they're even aware that it's in there.
No,
and
they're
I can't
not.
tell you how many family members that tell me, oh, well, she always said that, oh, he trusted his guy, or she trusted her guy. Okay, well, your guy might not even know that that's been laced with something. So
since you were talking about the drug paraphernalia or the testing of the drugs, or, who they got it from, and you have to talk to the family members to find out, I'm sure, who their supplier was. Do you have to take that knowledge? Do you testify in court on your findings?
I do, but rarely. Most of the time, they want the forensic pathologists in court.
Okay.
The only time I typically end up in court is if for some reason there's an issue that they want to raise about the scene that I was at and the forensic pathologist was not.
Okay.
That's typically, I've been deposed multiple times and never ended up in court behind that. But the only time that I ever end up there is usually if it's something that was scene related, or something that somebody allegedly said to me on the phone, or something that they found that way. Okay. But typically they always want to talk to our forensic pathologists, because they're the ones that conduct the autopsy and really contain, they have kind of the meat and potatoes of the case, shall we say, of the death.
So, and when you have gone to court to testify, can you tell us a little bit about that, so that our audience can actually have like a view on or an idea as to how that is like?
I would kind of characterize it like almost like a medieval joust. Side is trying to get you to say something a certain way, and the other side is trying to get you to say it a different way. Maybe that's simplifying things, but that's always kind of the way I perceive it. And again, I don't have a lot of experience. I haven't been to court much in 16 years. Okay. I can count on one hand how many times I've been to court. I've been deposed more than that, but it's very rare. But that's always the way it seems, is that they're, well, what about this? You know, do you think, and they try and kind of feed you words depending upon which side it is, or at least that's my perception of it.
So tell me about science and technology and how that has helped.
Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, think about all of those beautiful cases that you have, you know, those nice skeletonized remains that are stored in the anthro room, and how that has, you know, has definitely been put in the forefront with new science and the scientific approach and technology.
Has really been our friend, and the improvements have been just amazing. And probably in my infancy as an investigator, as Bertha knows, but I will share with the rest of you, I deal with a lot of the unidentified cases, meaning the cold cases of the medical examiner. We have many people from up to 40, 50 years ago that have never been identified for whatever reason. However, because of improved fingerprint technology, DNA, anything like that, and also the communication of the national network of police communicating with each other. You know, there used to be sort of this overlapping feeling of kind of, you know, we're not going to share anything because they don't want to take over we don't want them to take over our case. And there was some of that in historically, but I think we've all kind of figured out that we work a lot better together than separate. And the improvement of, for example, like when I say fingerprint technology, I'm saying, for example, the national database. As I understood it, in the 80s and 90s, like many departments didn't enter like people's fingerprints that had been arrested, for example, for misdemeanors or DUIs and kind of those kinds of crimes. So the database wasn't quite as large as it is now, whereas a lot of those departments have kind of entered their backlog, where we have a much bigger range of persons that we can cross-check our fingerprints against, our fingerprints of our deceased. So when I first entered, I think when I first took over the unidentified cases, I think we had around approximately 100 people that I was trying to figure out. We immediately got like 8 identifications just from fingerprints, just from entering.
Oh, wow.
That's fantastic.
Yes,
Yeah.
we did.
So we knew that that was already paying dividends. And then with the advancement of DNA technology, you know, back in the day with DNA, a lot of times you could only trace, for example, the maternal line. Now you can trace the paternal line. You can trace, you know, YSTR, which is male DNA. And so that creates such a big picture to assist us in, and there's a national database. Primarily it's CODIS, which is an FBI database. But what we do is the medical examiner, we enter all the information we have, fingerprints, DNA, anything like that from our unidentified bodies. And the family members of missing persons enter their information, like for example, buccal swabs, you know, the cheek swabs, so that they can enter their DNA into the missing person database. And then there's this awesome computer that cross-checks them all. Just, it takes time, obviously, because it's a big database.
Wow.
But they cross-check them. And a few years ago, I got a completely cold hit. Absolutely had no idea who this person was. He was a murder victim from 1984. And some little tiny police department in Ohio it was actually the police chief himself had gotten the buccal swabs from the mom and the siblings of this gentleman and had entered them into the DNA database. And a few months later, boom, we get a solid hit. It's absolutely the person.
Wow,
And
that's amazing.
it was, and which obviously was sad for the family in a way, because it's confirming that their loved one is truly deceased, which it's interesting when people have missing loved ones, they do find a way to hope that somehow maybe they went and started a new life somewhere and they don't really want to completely accept that the person probably isn't here anymore.
Yeah.
And that was the case with this family. Well, there was a silver lining to this case in that, you know, unfortunately, we did confirm that he passed away and we sent him back to be buried with his loved ones. And his mother, who was in her 80s, said, I can now die in peace because I know where my son is. I'm going to be laying next to him. But when it was a very small town and they, you know, put an obituary in, you know, that, you know, he'd been missing and, you know, he was found or what have you. And 2 women showed up at the funeral. One had been his girlfriend and she had their grandchild.
Oh, wow.
So they still had a piece of him that they knew existed and they never would have if this had never happened.
They would.
Right.
And then she also, the grandchild also was old enough that had a child, little baby too. And so they had this whole extension of their family that they never knew existed and it was still a part of him after all of that. So it still was sad. And obviously they you know, were told that their family member wasn't here anymore and he met with foul play, but they learned that they still had something of him. So I always considered that kind of an interesting outcome, you know.
Yeah. And
It kind of hit me in the feels a little bit, you know.
yeah, the one thing you said that I found interesting is when you said was the police chief in Ohio swabbed the mother and the child
and the siblings, yeah,
Okay.
the decedent siblings, yeah.
So here's my question. If somebody has a missing relative, and I would imagine that has to be like a certain amount of time before, you know, they'll consider somebody like a legit missing.
Right.
Can family members go to a police department and say, listen, I have a family member I haven't seen in years. I think there's been some foul play. Can you swab me, my children, and run it in a database to see if maybe he's lying in a morgue somewhere and we can at least bring him home, he or she home?
They can.
Really?
Yes.
I never knew
Yes. Yeah.
that. Okay.
Try and get the information out there whenever we have the ability, because it is definitely a tool. And, you know, if someone has a missing loved one that, you know, they think could, you know, definitely haven't heard from or what have you, you know, it's definitely good to put the information out there because, like I said, you know, they can be across the country and we can get some results.
Yeah, I think that's great. Is there a certain amount of time that family member needs to be missing before the agencies will swab? Oh.
That's a good question. And I don't know that I have the answer to that, actually.
Okay.
I do know that a lot of times police agencies will say, well, people are allowed to go missing. They're allowed to go start their life anew. But as far as how they categorize that and when they decide that they can submit that would be a question for police, actually. And I'm not really sure.
Okay. Honest answer. I just think that's this is a wow. I wonder how many families that have missing relatives realize that there's a possibility that they could help in solving the case if they knew to do that. It never occurred to me.
Well, I try and go to, you know, meetings of missing persons, missing kids, that sort of thing, and get the information out there. And actually, FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, has been very good with that, of getting the information out to those families that do have, you know, they've been very good about that. So, I mean, we try whenever we can to get the info out. But again, you know, if people don't know, you wonder if there are people out there just kind of that don't have that information and, you know, that we're missing a step there, you know.
How do you, in all encompassing, channelize those emotions and, you know, try to keep it as professional as possible?
Yeah, I really do think that it's important, and I try to make everyone feel like it's okay to feel however you're feeling. Sad, angry, resentment, whatever you feel. towards the witnesses, the deceased person, what have you. Obviously, you need to be professional, but I'm not a person that feels like, oh, I've said this to like new police recruits and that sort of thing. And I actually had a class of them a few days ago. It's okay to feel strongly about something. It's okay to crack and have a little tear come out of your eye or what have you. It's okay to empathize sometimes. Sometimes you're going to identify with a situation that is similar to something in your family or one of your loved ones or one of your friends. We all have loved ones with problems and with all kinds of drama and issues, and that's okay. It's okay to guard your mental health, and it's okay to not be used to it. Some people say, oh, decomposition doesn't bother me. Oh, that doesn't bother, I'm used to it. I don't feel like I'm ever used to it. Are there things that I think sometimes my brain lets me, I don't want to say discard, but just lets me kind of have a pass on sometimes? Maybe it's somebody that's reported to me from a hospital. It doesn't mean they're not important, but that might be somebody that I never even see. They go to the morgue, they get released to a funeral home. There's sometimes that I don't even see the person. But the one thing I hate to hear from any loved one is this, and they say it a lot, is, oh, I know you hear this all the time. You do this every day. No, your loved one is important. They all are. And you need answers. And we're going to do our best to give them to you. And I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's
no. I think it sounds beautiful.
Well, but that's who we work for. We work for the families. Our customers are unfortunately the deceased and the bereaved. That's who we work for. And that's who we owe our job and our answers and all of that effort that we put into for them. So, like I said, it might sound corny, but it's the truth. And
Yeah.
I'm never used to it. And, I'll be going along one day and I'll think something's not going to bother me. And then somehow somebody on the phone or something tugs my heart. And I just kind of, okay, well, we're going to have a little cry here. And you know what? That's okay. But I also have a very good support system. I have a family that is just completely supportive and loving and puts up with when I need to vent or I need to just talk about something that I found difficult. They're supportive of, therapy, mental health, everything else, there's no judgment. And I think that really helps.
Yeah.
I think when you have people behind you that have your back,
It makes a big difference.
it really does.
Yeah.
It does.
In
You know?
anything, but
In anything.
most
No, in anything.
definitely
Absolutely
with what
anything.
both of you do, dealing with a lot of tragedy and death, and that support system's got to be crucial. Just crucial.
It is. It really is. And I feel bad for people that maybe don't have that, because it really does make such a difference.
What would be, some words of advice for those who want to go the route that you've taken?
Oh, wow. That's heavy. That was deep. Be grateful. This is not you, and this is not happening to you, and this is not happening to your loved ones. But by that same token, move forward and do the absolute best you can for these people that you don't know and that you have no relationship with other than this. You're with them in their darkest hour. Make this terrible, dark day in their life slightly easier. Then that's the best day that I can have. And like I said, I know it sounds maybe a little corny, but if they want to follow this path, I would say it's very interesting. I like not knowing what's going to happen, what I'm going to learn, what I'm going to be presented with. And sometimes I know it's going to be difficult. And there have been times where I couldn't let something go, meaning a case or cases stayed with me and I couldn't get them out of my mind. And I had to ask for help to get those out of my mind, or at least to learn how to manage them within my mind. So I would just tell somebody, try and find healthy ways to deal with all the trauma that you're going to deal with as much as you can. You're going to fail sometimes and you're going to triumph sometimes. And that's okay. But talk to people, be honest, be open about things. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable. You should. You shouldn't like this. You shouldn't feel like, oh, this is just another day. This is just what I do. It's very difficult and sensitive subject matter, and it should be treated as such.
Well, that was a great conversation with Wendy, our medical-legal death investigator. We have learned so much information. I can't even get your name straight. You have been absolutely incredible. Bertha, Harlot, your questions and your insight with Wendy tonight, it's just been so much information that it's just, I'm like a sponge. I'm going to have to go leave here and go wring myself out of information, but I cannot thank you enough. All of us, all three of you, for such an incredible, informative podcast. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. And Wendy, it was a pleasure,
Thank you all
like
as well.
always. Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure.
Yes,
As
Wendy, it
always.
was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harlot.
Thank you, Bertha.
Nice meeting you.
Thank you, querida.
Nice meeting you too.